Hello, and welcome to our tour of our land management research area. My name is Michelle Bertelson, and I'm an ecologist here at the center. We've been working on this research for about 20 years. So I'm just going to take you through a little tour of the plots, show you some of the things we found, and should be fun. So most people, if you are familiar with the Wildflower Center, this is the view you think of. So wildflowers, gardens, this view. And that is certainly true. This is one of my favorite spots in the Wildflower Center. So in the foreground here, we have a garden. It's a maintained garden, and it's one of the prettiest, I think, that we have. But if you look at the background, there's something else going on. It hints to something else happening at the Wildflower Center. And so that background looks a little bit charred, and it is because we have set it on fire. So this is a natural area that backs right up to the gardens, and it is maintained with prescribed fire. And the reason that we do that is that we are here in Central Texas at the southern end of the Great Plains, which is a grassland system that goes through the center of this continent. And it is a fire maintained system. So in many areas, we have enough rain for woodlands, but we don't have the woodlands because the fire kept them in check. And so this is a historical disturbance that these communities need. And so we've put it back in our land management. This is sort of an image of a healthy midgrass prairie system that you would find in the hill country. So in the foreground, you've got the sea of grass, but then in the hills, you have more of that woodland. And so you get this patchy landscape, and the fire helps maintain that. But we're not content just to use the tool. We also want to understand it. And so since about the year 2000, we've been conducting land management research. And so the treatments are fire, prescribed fire, and prescribed mowing. And they happen in 3 different seasons: summer, winter, and fall. And then there are also plots that we don't do anything to. Those are our controls that we are just watching. And so this is the basic layout of the plots. And so in the top of the screen, you can see for scale, most of what people think of when they think of the Wildflower Center. Those are all the buildings in the central gardens and the parking lot. But then to the south, most of the area is actually devoted to research. And so the red plots, each plot is about 1.5 acres. The red ones are burn plots, the yellow ones are mow plots, and the green ones are controls. So each plot has one treatment applied to it. So a summer plot will be burned only in the summer. A summer mow plot will be mowed only in the summer. And those treatments happen every 3 to 5 years. And then there's one extra mow treatment, which is called a frequent mow treatment. And those are mowed 3 times a year, every year. And what we're trying to do is tease out how individual species respond to these treatments and how the community as a whole responds to the treatments. And so this is kind of a visual representation of what we're trying to tease out. And so on the left, we have Black-Eyed Susan, and you can see a line where the Black-Eyed Susan stops. And the difference there is the left side of that line was burned in the summer, and the right side of that line is a summer mow. And so just those 2 treatments vastly changed the composition of what we're looking at. This is a little bit more dramatic. So on the left-hand side, we've got Indian blanket, and on the right, again, the Black-Eyed Susan. And so the Black-Eyed Susan really like the summer burns. That's where we see them. The Indian blanket like every other treatment except for the summer burns. And so this difference, these pictures were taken on the same day. It's the same soil type. They're within sight of each other. The only difference is the treatment. And that's what we're trying to pull out. And so this is probably a competitive interaction going on. The Indian blanket on the left is a very strong competitor, and the Black-Eyed Susan less so. And so we think that the Black-Eyed Susan is taking advantage of the Indian blanket not being as present on those summer burn plots and expanding. And that's what we're trying to figure out. And ultimately, we're trying to encourage that kind of diversity. We want lots of species. And the reason that we're doing this, or the reason we originally were doing this, is to help land managers. So people managing land for forage, people managing parks, people managing for habitat. There are a wide variety of reasons that people are managing land and trying to get particular effects. And so what we're trying to do is get nuanced information for these people so that they know how these communities respond to the treatments, but then we're also looking at how the weather and the climate interacts with these treatments, which is why it's so important that this be so long term. Now, the next question that I get tends to be, how do you do the prescribed fires? And so we're just going to walk through one here. This is one of our plots. And so the beginning of every prescribed fire starts with a backing fire. And so this is a slow moving fire that's pushing into the wind. And so it can't go very fast because the wind, it's going against the wind. And so you put the fire down and then you basically put out the downwind side, the side that would go with the wind. And then you just let it creep back. Now we have two teams here working together to sort of ring this plot. And so they need to stay even with each other. They can't get ahead of each other so that we're going to use the fire itself to contain it. So right now, this is what's called a flanking fire. So the fire is perpendicular to the wind. Now here in just a moment, we'll see both teams will pause for a moment. And that's because they're getting to the point where when they turn that corner, they'll be having a head fire. So they need to make sure two things. One, that both teams are even with each other, and two, that we have enough black. So that area behind where the fire was is called the black. It's all the fuel has been burned away. It won't burn again. And that's what's actually going to stop the head fire. And so they're even, they've got enough black. And so now they're going to go ahead and meet up in the middle and start the head fire. And the head fire goes with the wind. So it moves faster, it's more intense. And this is what we have all that black to stop. So here goes our head fire, and the backing fire and the head fire are going to be drawn to each other and come into the center and extinguish each other. So there, that's our first prescribed fire for you guys to see. And I like to see those nice clean burn lines. So beyond doing the treatments, I'm not going to show you mowing, but the other fun thing that we do is we go out twice a year in the spring and in the fall, and we identify all the plants and we estimate their cover. So this is our vegetation survey going on. And this is what we're looking at. So every plot has a 50-meter transect, a 50-meter line laid down on it in the same place every time. And then we put these 1-meter quads down and identify all the plants in them, and then estimate how much of the ground that each species covers. And so in your head right now, I'd like you to just guess how many species you think are in that little quad. So that's a 1 by 1 meter quad. A meter is roughly a yard. Most people will guess 5 to 6. It looks like about 5 to 6. This is the data sheet from that quad. And so on each one of those codes is a species that's in there. And in that 1 meter quad, we had 25 species. So that's the kind of diversity that we're looking at and that we're trying to rebuild. So I'm standing here on one of our frequent mow plots. So this plot is mowed 3 times a year every year, in the summer, in the fall, and in the winter. Now that's a lot of mowing for a natural area, but it's not very much mowing for a more constructed area, a downtown area. And so originally when this treatment was put down, it was to simulate grazing. We would love to have had some cows out here, but it just wasn't logistically possible. So we mowed because we wanted to find out if mowing and burning were equivalent, and we've sort of found out that they're not. But these plots, these frequent mow plots, have become very useful to us beyond their original intention of simulating grazing because they're showing us other things. So you can kind of see behind me, you can see the line. So this is a different treatment, and this over here is the frequent mow. And so these plots always look kind of like a golf course. They're always short like this. And part of that is that we mow them 3 times a year, but even it's several months in between mows. And so even between that, they stay short. So what's happened over time is we've pushed it to these shorter species, but we haven't damaged the diversity. The diversity is still very high. So just right here at my feet, I've got antelope horn, which is a pollinator plant. I've got Texas grama. I've got some bladderpod. I've got some anemone. And so there's just a diversity of smaller statured plants all living in the same place. And we've looked at these plots a lot to figure out what is this community, because we're not putting any water on it, we're not fertilizing it, they're surviving on their own, and it's very diverse. It's a multi-species community. And so that's useful to us in urban applications as well as wildland applications. And so we were looking at these plots as we started looking at multi-species turfgrass. We were looking at them as we started developing green roof mixes, because we're trying to figure out what are those functional communities that exist out here and can handle these kinds of conditions, and what grows together naturally. And so these plots have been a jumping off point for other research. These are our turfgrass plots. And so we took species that we found out in the shortgrass prairies that we have on those frequent mow plots and recombined them and tested them to find a multi-species lawn that people could have that would function more like a natural system but still behave like a lawn. Similarly, we were looking at the research plots and all the species combinations we had out there to test different combinations that might work in green roofs, because the green roofs that were being used at the time in Texas were just not working. They were using temperate species that couldn't handle the conditions here. And so we looked at the natural communities and then we pulled them in and found a way to apply them to a more urban situation. So that's how this research has begun to provide more than we originally intended. And so we can start building into urban areas real pieces of nature that are functional and that are acting like natural communities. And we're using those natural communities as our base, but creating something new in these urban situations. This is one of our seasonal mow plots. This is a winter mow, so it gets mowed in the wintertime once every 2 to 5 years, the same time that the burns happen. And so we originally started this research to test the difference between mowing and burning and see if there's a difference. One of the reasons we started it. And so we have found that there is a difference. And one of the big differences between the mow plots and the burn plots is the buildup of thatch. So every year as the grasses die, or as you mow them, you get this laydown of organic material, which is called thatch. And it's a good thing in many ways. It acts as a mulch and it slowly breaks down and helps you build your soil. And so you want it a lot of the time. But on the infrequent mow plots, the plots that only get mowed every few years, this gets very, very thick and it doesn't break down very quickly. And so what happens is it starts to suppress germination. And so you still have a good cover, you just start to get fewer species over time. The smaller species that have trouble getting through the thatch just can't get up here. Whereas on the burn plots, this gets cleared off every few years, you get a chance at germination. This is a summer burn plot, so it's burned in the summer once every 2 to 5 years. And so this is the treatment that most closely resembles the natural fire return. Most of our fires would have been in the summer. When it's dry, you get dry lightning, starts a fire, spreads. Native Americans also started fires in different seasons, but still most of them were occurring in the summer, specifically the late summer. And so what we're seeing on these plots is it's still a very grass-dominated system. We see reduction of brushy areas, but we're seeing also a lot more forbs. The grasses are dominant, but they're not as dominant as they are on the winter plots, and so you can see some other species. So this grass next to me is called little bluestem, and it's called one of the grandfathers of the prairie. It is one of the grasses that was dominant across most of central Texas at one time. It's also a grass that cattle like to eat a lot, and so it's one that tends to get grazed out eventually. But here at the Wildflower Center, it's starting to recover. And so this is a recovery stand. Right about there was a juniper that died, and we burned it, and so now it's gone. But underneath it, these little grasses were hiding, and as we've burned over the years and have removed grazing, they have spread.
And so you can see how far it spread behind me. When I started here, this was just a little tiny clump right here, and they're spreading. And so we like this because this is one of the big grasses of the prairie. It's one of the foundation species. And these grasses grow differently than a lot of the invasive grasses like King Ranch bluestem. So they're a dense clump with a really deep, really dense root system. And what happens is there's actually space in between them that ends up filled with other species. And so you get a higher diversity when these are the dominants versus when King Ranch bluestem is the dominant. So we're excited to see these guys coming back. So this is a fall burn that was recently burned. And so we're now in spring and we're getting a little bit of rain. And so we're seeing everything resprout. So these little clumps here are little bluestem, and they were present during the burn. What the burn did was it took off their tops, and now they're resprouting. They look like little hedgehogs. So that's an important thing to note, is these prescribed fires generally are not killing a lot of the grasses, they're just taking the tops off. And that's good for the grass because a lot of them actually need their tops taken off either by grazing or by burning periodically, or they get what you call decadent. They're basically choking in old material. The other thing that it does is for one season opens up this ground and gives us some bare ground. And you don't want bare ground very long or very often, but you want it occasionally because it leaves sites where seeds can get in and get started. Whereas when these guys are grown up, it's hard for anything to get germinated underneath them. Things do, but it's a little easier for the seeds to get in contact with the soil. And so we like to do this periodically to just keep rejuvenating the system. And as you can see, I spoke about this earlier with the little bluestem. They grow in these clumps, and they are always about 18 inches apart. They kind of self-space, and what that does is it lets the smaller things grow in between them, even when they grow up. This is a control plot. So on these plots, we don't do anything to them except monitor them twice a year with everything else. And so what's happened to them over time is that the brushy component has grown up more and more, and the grass component has shrunk. The diversity is not bad on these plots, but we are losing the grassland areas, and the woody areas are taking over. This is what a lot of Central Texas looks like right now for that exact reason. It doesn't get much land management, and natural fires have been suppressed. So we've seen an expansion of this kind of brushy area. Behind me I have an oak motte that hasn't had any land management for many years. It's on one of our control plots. And so what you can see is the oaks themselves have quite a bit of brush underneath them that's growing right up against the trunk all the way up into the branches. And while that low brushy layer is good in many cases, it can get too dense, and it can also make the entire community less resilient to fire. So most of the time when a fire approaches it, it'll get to that edge and it'll just go out. It won't go into it. But when it's been very dry, very hot for a long time, once the fire does get in, having that much brush underneath your oaks, underneath your bigger trees, not just oaks, makes it much more likely for you to get a crown fire. And a crown fire is very difficult to contain. And so when we're thinking about land management, we tend to be thinking about diversity of species, but also of ages of plants, but then also of structure. So we want a lot of those little brushy species. We just don't want them to get so dense that they're threatening the rest of the community.
So I'd just like to show you a few more burn effects that were not apparent in the videos. So this is a tree that's had a burn go under it quite recently, and what you can see here is the lower branches are browned out, and we might have killed a few of those branches, but we didn't kill the upper ones. And so when you get frequent low intensity fires moving under these trees, what happens is that you tend to limb them up a little bit, but you don't tend to kill the tree. And what this does is it makes the tree itself more likely to survive a wildfire. So here, the tree on the right has had 7 fires run underneath it. And so you can see its trunk. And whereas the trees on the left have had no fires, and so you can't see their trunk, they're completely surrounded by brush. And the only difference is the fire, that the tree on the right used to have that much brush. But so if today we get a wildfire run through there, it'll pass right underneath that tree on the right. But the one on the left, because when wildfires go through, it tends to be the hottest, driest day of the year, it's much more likely that that tree will get fire up in its crown. So oddly, having more frequent low intensity fires makes the entire system more resilient to a wildfire. And this is just an image of new germination coming in right after a burn. And then one more effect of burns that are different than mows is that the burns tend to be very patchy. And this is one of our plots, and the area that is unburned, the fire always goes out right there every time. And so the community in that little shaded patch is different than the one out in the open where the fire always gets it. And so one of the things that fire can give us is diversity across communities. So not only within communities, but we have different types of communities over space. And that's something that we're trying to encourage. Thank you guys for coming to our little research tour. And I should mention that as I'm recording this in spring of 2021, we are working with a postdoctoral researcher named Sean Griffin, who is analyzing all 20 years of our data. So pretty soon we'll have even more results to share with you.